Delia, welcome to our second podcast. Delia McCabe, neuroscientist, nutritionist, and a psychologist. And we're going to be talking about vegan diets particularly, aren't we?
We are, Gabby. Thank you for the invite. I'm delighted to be here again.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so let's get into it because I was definitely curious personally because I watched The Game Changers, which came out about 6 months ago, I think, late last year. And it was all about vegan diets and really about elite athletes that were vegan diets. And it had some really interesting research that was done in it. It was very convincing. And after watching it, I felt compelled to try vegan for a month, which I ended up doing. I definitely felt more energized, but I did feel hungry. But I'd like to know what, it just didn't feel like I was ever filled up. But I would like to know your position on vegan diets, whether you think they are good for you, not so good for you, or yeah, just your well-researched knowledge that you have about this topic.
This is an interesting question, and I've dealt with it in a number of different ways over the years. And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind is vegan diets in relation to protein, because that's the first thing that people are asked when they follow a vegan diet. Where do you get your protein? And it's based on a common misconception that plant food doesn't have protein. But if we just go a step further, we'll see that all plants, to greater or lesser degrees, and all animal products are made up of amino acids. And animal products have a lot of amino acids, which means they're they've got concentrated protein in them. And things like grains and rice have different concentrations of amino acids, and so do some plants. So if you have a really good diet made up of a wide variety of vegetables and grains and legumes and nuts and seeds, you'll get the full array of amino acids. So technically speaking, or should I say theoretically speaking, you should be able to get all the amino acids you need to be able to do what protein does in the body, which is repair and grow and build and so on. And it's important because of cell membranes and so on. So theoretically speaking, a vegan diet should be able to give you everything that you need in relation to protein. That's the first thing. The second thing is it cannot give you everything in relation to all the nutrients we need for optimal health, including brain health, because vegan diets will be low or non-existent in B12, which you get from animal products and animal flesh. It's also got a different kind of iron in it to the iron that you get in plants. So the iron you get in animal products is more easily absorbable for humans versus the iron you get in plant products. And also you may not get enough zinc in plants versus animal products. And those are three extremely important nutrients in terms of overall health and specifically brain health. So there have been cases of women who brought their children up as vegans, and these children end up either dying or with brain damage because you need those nutrients for brain development. So this is a very serious conversation. However, if you have a very good vegan diet and you supplement wisely with the correct nutrients that you're not getting enough of, you can have a very healthy diet. And I think that's what a lot of people are referring to when they say that a vegan diet can meet all your nutritional needs. Yes, but if it's supplemented wisely with the ones you can't get from animal products, the nutrients. So it becomes a complex conversation because it's not just about is vegan good, is vegan bad. It's how you do vegan. The other important thing to keep in mind is that when people eat animal products and they follow a whole lot of media and blogs and people that say animal products are really good for you, they're really happy because everyone likes good news about their bad habits. And if someone loves eating bacon and eggs for breakfast and someone says, hey, that's a great diet for you, and on top of it, you'll lose weight, guess what? They'll be following that diet. But, they'll end up being very constipated because animal products have very little to no fiber. They will end up being deficient in a lot of nutrients if they're not also eating a lot of plant foods, which are very rich in fiber and a whole lot of nutrients. And the challenge is also if they're going into a diet like a paleo diet or a keto diet, they can end up very low in carbohydrate intake. And carbohydrates are the primary and preferred fuel for the brain. So, that leads one down another pathway. What are the reasons that people are choosing this? If they're choosing it for weight loss, that's a different discussion. If they're choosing it for animal welfare, that's a different discussion. And we've touched on that, Gabby. So, it's an interesting point that you made. When you followed the vegan diet, you felt a whole lot, you felt more You had more energy. A lot of people report that initially. People often also lose weight on a vegan diet. But the long-term studies of people that aren't supplementing well on a vegan diet are not very well investigated. And that's obviously where one would want to get to a point where you can investigate the diet long-term for people. But then, you bring in the ethics. You can't do a randomized, double-blind controlled trial on that, because we know that these nutrients, if not consumed, actually have long-term devastating, sometimes, especially in children, irreversible effects. So you couldn't do that from an ethical perspective. And then, the other thing to keep in mind is that who's going to fund that kind of research? A research partner with very, very deep pockets, because you have to control for so many different variables when you do that kind of research. So you noticed that you felt better, you had more energy, but you were always hungry. Now, that can be for a number of reasons. There could be a psychological variable attached to thinking that animal products give you real protein, and so you never feel fully satisfied until you actually have real protein. That's the one side. The other side is that maybe your stomach was stretched when you ate animal products, although it doesn't really make sense, because you think that with plant products, with all the fiber, your stomach would be stretched more. So that's an interesting thing. Do we build up a tolerance for protein if we consume it when we're young and then need that form of protein, as we get older? Or is it just a psychological variable that comes into play? So we don't have answers to that yet. One thing we know for sure is that the most researched diet is the Mediterranean diet. And that's a diet that includes grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, good oils, and animal products, not in vast quantities, but they definitely exist in the diet. And that's the most researched diet, which shows very good outcomes in terms of weight stability, in terms of even mood, and in terms of longevity and cognitive capacity. So we know that a diet that is more well balanced in terms of not cutting anything out significantly is the most researched diet.
Yeah, and that's the blue zones, right? Like the Mediterranean and the Japanese islands, and where they eat that kind of diet. Very rich
Absolutely.
in fatty oils and fish and, yeah, vegetables. And it sounds like they're having a pretty good life as well. So, and I really appreciate the psychological aspect. And I think that's so important not to negate that, because your physical body is operating with the psychological level as well, and making those choices and why you make choices and what you're expecting to feel like as well, from diet and what the food you take into your body. But I will say this about the game changers. They did prove that B12 is actually being supplemented through animals as well. That they actually proved that, and that animals are getting the supplement, and therefore all we're doing is getting the supplement via the animal. So if you're vegan and you're taking B12, you're just bypassing the carrier more than it's actually coming from the animal.
Correct. So, it opens up another discussion. And then you say, what kind of supplement must you have and how often must you have it? And then, of course, you can build up a store of B12 in the body. And if you don't have any B12 for a couple of months or even years, some research has shown, you will actually be able to draw on that stored B12. But over a period of time, you'll actually become deficient. And that's where it becomes a problem. So these are all complex discussions. But I think, just to go back to the psychology of it, Gabby, I think it's a very important point to discuss, because the reason a person changes their diet can be very leading in relation to how they supplement that diet and what their choices are around that diet. So if they choose not to eat animal products because of animal welfare, they're obviously more sensitive people than people that don't care. So then that leads you to the point, they're much more sensitive, they care a lot more. How does that work out in neuroanatomy or in neurophysiology? So these are people who maybe have a heightened emotional response. So because they have this heightened emotional response, what does that mean in relation to their food choices generally? If they're much more emotional, maybe they actually suffer more from feelings of stress. That means they would be using up more nutrients in relation to that. Then you find, particularly a demographic that often changes their diet is young girls. Young girls change their diet when they become exposed to the media that says they need to conform to a specific body size. So they change their diet, generally going to vegetarian and vegan diets, It gives them a feeling of control over their lives, which is very much a psychological perspective that they're taking over their lives, because they're generally at a certain age where some things seem very much out of control. Their bodies are changing, they're experiencing hormone fluctuation, so on. So often they choose to modify their diet because it gives them some control. If they go and consume a vegetarian and a vegan diet, they then start declining in zinc, B12 and iron as well. So then they can become anemic, which is a huge challenge. But if they start getting suboptimal amounts of zinc, this has a much more dangerous effect, because this affects their taste buds. So eventually they start losing their appetite, and then they start losing weight. And often that gains the respect of their peers, and also the concern of their parents. And then it's a matter of, oh no, so-and-so is losing so much weight, that's not good. But that gives them a feeling of control. They've actually taken control of the situation. And of course, there's certain names for these kind of mental health challenges that young girls can experience. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to reason with a person when their brain isn't functioning optimally. And I've had a few cases of young girls that refuse to change their diet. And, I've had to send them to the doctor to go and get blood tests. And the doctor can come back to them with actual proof to say, look, you're extremely low in B12, you're actually anemic, and you have very little zinc. And then I have to sit down with them and explain to them that this is actually changing the way their brain works, and they can't make good decisions. Unfortunately, in the past, these kinds of girls were sent to psychologists, and the psychologists would try and talk them better and try and reason with them to start eating food and adding different foods to their diet. These girls couldn't hear those words of counseling because their brain was actually incapable of doing that. Now, enlightened therapists know that you have to deal with this issue on both fronts. So this is why the discussion of the psychology of your dietary choice is very, very important. The other thing is, if someone is trying to manage their, for example, type 2 diabetes, and they come across some information on the internet that says, hey, you follow a ketogenic diet, you can get your blood glucose under control. They then follow that diet and they start losing weight, and I think that's the most wonderful thing. But no one says, hey, hold on a second, you could end up with kidney stones. You could be overloading your kidneys. If you follow a paleo diet, you may be eating too much protein, also a problem for your kidneys. So the reasons people follow a diet are just as important as the particular diet that they follow. Sorry, that was a bit of a long explanation.
No, that's so true. And I really like what you said about it's definitely control about, if you can't control the external world, you'll try and control things that you can control. And that's anorexia I've read about, it's really about control, wanting to be an anorexic because you can't control the conditions of others and what's going on around you. Also, I think the psychological aspect is, it's like mind over matter. And Delia, you'd be proud to hear it's my second day without coffee. I was really inspired after the last time we spoke, because I've been drinking 2 coffees a day, and I know it's not good for me. I can feel it. I can feel my adrenaline running, and I don't feel good, and I don't feel balanced, and energies are spiking and going up and down. So I'm doing it again. I set it in motion about a week ago that I'm going to do this for a month, and I'm only going to drink hot water, cold water, and mineral water, and no other drinks. So, but the last couple of days I have had black tea because I don't want to get that really terrible caffeine headache, and then I'll taper off the tea over the next couple of days. But so that's part of a diet for me, that mind over matter, and I think that's what it becomes. And I think that people that really struggle with diets, they just can't get that mind to come into line with, this is what you got to do to be healthy, this is what you got to do to have energy, feel better, lose weight, whatever they're doing a diet for. And I think that's when people fail, because they just can't get that. It's a strengthening your mind. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's quite complex, because, changing your diet isn't just about changing the food you eat. It's about changing the neural pathways that you've established over very long periods of time. And often, that starts in your family of origin. What foods did your family eat? Why did they choose those foods? Did they choose certain foods when people were stressed, or, for different celebrations? Was there a celebration every week? What foods did they choose to celebrate? It becomes a complex discussion. So those neural pathways are very well entrenched by the time people reach adulthood, and they then start making decisions based on how they feel, maybe their body shape, their mood, and things like blood glucose with type 2 diabetes. So those are things that need to be taken into account. So there's the psychology of that, there's the neurology of that with the neural pathways, and then of course it's what your body needs. If you do a lot of physical activity, you need more food than someone who sits in front of their computer every day. Men and women have different needs as well. So that's something. Then you have age that you take into account. Then you have metabolic activity you take into account. And there's even a genetic component as to how quickly you use up energy and how efficient that energy is. And even in terms of how your body uses nutrients, there's a genetic link to that. So there are all these different discussions that have to come into it. So it's not simply just changing behavior. It's changing, why do you want the behavior? What are your values? What kind of person are you? Are you the kind of person that needs support from other people? Are you really disciplined? Can you do it on your own? Will you do better to have a mentor or a coach to lead you along this path? Do you need to make a giant change or a small change? And I'll just give you a story of a situation that I had, which taught me a very big lesson. I gave a talk at a school, and I was teaching, the parents at the school about how important nutrition was for the children to reach their genetic potential. Everybody wants the best for their children. And if they're eating really well and supplying their brain with all the nutrients that it needs to grow really well, it will reach its genetic potential. So we had this lovely conversation, and I sent them off all excited, about changing their children's diets with ease and simplicity. But I forgot to tell them to do it slowly. I forgot to tell them that revolution is not a good idea. Evolution is a better idea. So the next day I got a call from one of the mums, and she said, I was so excited when I went home. I went into the pantry and I threw away all the junk food. And then the family came home and they looked at the bin and they said, what are all our favorite snacks doing in the bin? And then she had a problem. And then of course they all hated me. So now I know to tell people to make changes, slowly. Don't go and throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. Just run out of certain things and then replace them with a healthier alternative. Don't tell people how bad something is, tell them how good something is rather. And, never deprive anybody, always tell them this is a much tastier replacement. And, we've spoken about chocolate before. So these are different ways to get people to change the way they're doing what they're doing in relation to their food and their food choices, but making it easier and nicer with no deprivation. And I think when people approach it from that perspective, it's a different approach. I read a blog post yesterday by a very well-respected doctor in the functional medicine field, and he was telling people what they should start eating. And I really respect everything that he says, and he's a phenomenal voice in the wellness industry. But my perspective is a little bit different, and it's probably because of my psychology background. And it would rather be to add a whole lot of things into your diet until the bad things fall out, because then you don't feel deprived. And that is just because I understand human nature maybe a little bit more than he does because of my background. So we want to avoid deprivation. That's the first thing we want to avoid. We want to make food delicious. We want to make it appetizing. We want people to be excited for their next meal, not to be dreading it. And you don't do that by taking out all the food they love and adding in food they don't love. That's not the way to do it. There's a much more subtle and easier way to do it, until eventually they look up and they go, well, I haven't had that junky food for months. And that's the aim of the exercise.
Yeah, and I think I was saying to you about advertising as well, that I feel that people, they're being advertised that these foods are food for starters, but the rule is shop on the outside of the supermarket and not the middle aisles, because it's not nutritious food. It's filler, a lot of it, and I think it's quite challenging for people if they haven't been exposed, like talking about what you've been brought up with. If you've been brought up with, frozen peas and meat and potatoes and not a lot of a variance of food, you'd see it very simplistic or black and white, or whatever's in the supermarket is okay to ingest, and you don't really make that connection that what you're putting into your body is having an effect on your health. You're just going with what you know, and you haven't really branched out, because it takes a lot. It takes a lot of initiative to seek out advice or information, to look things up, to buy books, to read articles, to look at videos about health and wellness. If it hasn't been part of your upbringing, it can be, that can be a stumbling block in itself. And to understand that just because there's an ad for something that it's okay to eat it, because it's really not. It's back to what, about someone's making money from those things. So I think it really is those two things, like really that psychological comprehension of your behavior and how you've been trained, and overcoming that to be able to accept a healthy diet. Because then there's a lot of what people think about what a healthy diet is. Like you said, people think of it as being boring or bland or not edible. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge deterrent. That's why most people, when they think about a healthy diet, they think of carrot sticks, and that doesn't inspire anybody. So that's a huge problem. And I think people just assume that if something is palatable, it's good for you. Just because you can eat something doesn't mean it's actually food. It's just a mixture of chemicals, and that's a huge problem. But then it's about taste buds, as we were saying, you get acquired, you acquire that kind of food. But the thing that we spoke about on the last podcast was fat, and how when you have enough of the right fat, it actually impacts your taste buds, and it also makes sure that the flavor molecules in the food that you're eating are well dispersed. So your food tastes more flavorful when it's got good fat with it. And that's a very important thing to keep in mind as well. But I think this is a little bit of a sobering comment, but most people only want to change when they're in pain. Pain seems to be the avoidance of pain seems to be a greater motivator than the gain of something. And that's a very sad thing about human nature. So mostly when people are, feeling really sick and tired and overweight, or they've got a diagnosis of like type 2, or even, with cognitive decline, people go, I better change my diet. So it's unfortunately when they get to the end of the road that they want to change their diet. There are very few people that are proactive and say, I actually want to make sure that terrible thing doesn't happen to me. Unfortunately, it happens to them, and then they make the decision. So I think that if people are exposed more and more to this, I'm hoping that human trend will shift and that people will become more proactive. But even if they're not proactive, they can figure out, if they listen to the right people, that it's not about deprivation. It can actually be about enjoyment. Because if you can still enjoy all your food, Gabby, and love all your food, and it's healthy for you, and you gain energy and enthusiasm, and you cope better with life, and you lose weight, who wouldn't choose that?
Absolutely. And I think it is just, it is taking that initiative to expose yourself to something else and not fear it as well. Some people can fear giving up those sort of bad habits, or people can wear bad habits as badges as well. Like, oh yeah, I ate, I ate a whole cake, or, they can
absolutely,
they kind of get some kind of joy out of saying how gluttonous they can be at times. But Delia, for me, I think, eating a healthy, balanced diet, it's just imperative for myself, and health and well-being has always been big in my life. But for people that don't have that, what would be your suggestion to get onto that path of health and wellness? If they haven't been exposed, like you have, like I have, what would be your insight to trying healthier diet, going to organic markets? What would be like your first choice of thing to do?
I think the first thing that someone needs to think to themselves is, why do they want to make a change? I think they need to be very clear on why they want to make a change. If they want to lose weight, then they need to set a goal. Have a 2-3 month goal and say, okay, I'd like to lose this amount of weight, but I want to do it without feeling deprived. And then find a way, find somebody that can support them in that goal. If they want to do that to lower their blood glucose, then they need to investigate that. And interestingly, it's all the same path that they'll choose, but their motivation is really important. If you want to, manage your type 2 diabetes better so that you can play with your grandchildren and be with them while they're growing up, that's a very much more powerful motivator than saying to yourself, I just need to lower my blood glucose level. It needs to be tied to something that you value and something that's very important to you, because then you'll invest a lot more emotional energy into that change. I think something else that people have to realize is that change is actually hard, and it's difficult in the beginning, but it gets easier as you go along. And that's just because you start forming a new neural pathway. And, every day it gets a little bit easier, and every day you make a better choice. So I think the first thing people need to do is sit down and be very clear about why they want to make the change. And once they do that, they can attach it to an outcome that means a lot to them. And then they'll be much more motivated to do that. I think, having someone stand over you and saying, you need to do this because X, Y, and Z, the doctor is very seldom instrumental in getting the person to change unless he terrifies the living daylights out of them. and says you're going to be dead in 2 weeks, which doctors don't do. You know, they can be serious, but they're not going to say that. So tying it to something that really matters. Maybe you want to go on a cruise, obviously post-COVID. And when you go on the cruise, you want to feel healthy. You want to go swimming in the ocean. You want to go snorkeling. And then you tie it to that ultimate goal. And to be able to do that, you need to make some changes in your life. And I think for me, that's a big thing. And that's just bringing the psychology back into it, Gabby.
I definitely think that's the first step. You have to set your mind to a goal, or just program it. Like, like I've been thinking about the coffee, giving up the coffee for the past week. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it on this day, and I'm giving it up, and just imagining it as well. And you kind of imagine what it's going to be like not having that thing that you've become dependent on, and it's really, the joy of that as well is when you do something and you see you can achieve it. You can do more as well. You can just keep going. So it's just like there's little steps of achievement, and that kind of spurs you on to keep on those paths to goals. And Delia, again, I know we were saying about, like, I tried that vegan for a month, and I was just wondering what would be, if you start a diet, is a month enough? How long do you have to give your body to really get the benefits of a diet? Is it 3 months, 6 months? Like, what does your body have to go through to eliminate all those other, what have you been taking into the body, if it's been like lots of sugar and fat? And, how long does it take to eliminate that from your body? Do you have that kind of information?
That's a Pandora's box question. But it's a good question.
I just don't think a month is enough. Like, a month is kind of, it's just something you play with. But if you're serious about something, I don't know, I feel like you'd have to give it 3, 6 months, a year to really notice the benefits or the difference in your energy levels and, physical body.
It's a good question, Gabby. I think everybody wants to have instantaneous results, which is why over-the-counter meds are so popular, because if you've got a headache, just swallow a tablet and it must be gone instantly. The body takes time to change and adapt. And, the 21-day myth, the 21-day habit myth started because a plastic surgeon realized, and this was a couple of decades ago, that it takes 21 days for a person to actually recognize their new face. And so some of the self-styled motivation gurus took that on board and changed the message slightly to say it takes 21 days to create a new habit, which is not true. It takes 61 plus days to create a new habit. So I think a lot of people want to do something for a month and they think that the habit's ingrained. It's definitely not. You need another 2 months to do that. So that's the first part of, answering your question. The second part of that is, if your body has been used to highly refined, lots of sugar, lots of damaged fat, processed food, you're going to definitely crave that kind of food for a period of time. Now, it depends on how long you've eating that food for. It depends on the reasons you were eating that food for. It depends on exactly what kinds of food that is. So that can take a long time to get over that habit. When you talk to people who've had a smoking addiction, when you speak to them, they say if they get into an environment where someone is smoking, instantly they feel like lighting up again. And it can be very similar in terms of, eating junky food. So you don't want to expose yourself to those environments very quickly. You want to make sure that you avoid those environments because you don't want to quickly fall back into the bad habit. So that's another thing to keep, to take into account. The other thing about how your body's going to respond, the body loves good food and all the nutrients that you can possibly supply it with. So the minute you start doing that, the body's going to start using it, because food is actually information, and food will tell your cells what to do and they'll start working more efficiently. And like you noticed, you had more energy, you felt lighter and brighter. So that is definitely a very positive change, but you also felt hungry. So someone would have to go over that if they really wanted to stick to the no eating meat program. And then they'd have to make sure that they're supplementing correctly with those nutrients. And then they'd have to make sure that they didn't feel hungry, because if you feel hungry, you're going to fall off the wagon, so to speak. So it's those kind of things to take into account. So it definitely comes back to the commitment to why the person wants to change. And the body will happily take all the wonderful good food that you can give it and will use it. And people can notice a difference in their blood glucose in 72 hours. When they have enough of the right kinds of food that balance blood glucose out. And instantly they'll start feeling better. And then, they can starting to cut back with their doctor's support on the medication that they're busy taking. But it's a matter of just, being wise about it, making sure that you don't have the kinds of food in your pantry that you're going to fall back on when you get to the end of the day and you go, oh, I've had a bad day and I don't feel like making a meal. You need to set up those kind of checks and balances to make sure that you don't, fall back on the bad choices again. But as far as the body goes, the body will be ecstatic to get all those nutrients and be able to use it really well. And that'll improve your gut, it'll improve your mood, it'll improve your focus, your concentration, you'll start losing weight. And all of those things are positive reinforcements for your decision. So it's kind of like nature helps you along the way if you make the decision and you move forward with that. So sorry, once again, a bit of a long explanation.
No, I really like what you said about, I've had a bad day and then you reach for the bad thing, whether that's wine, chocolate, ice cream, cakes. It's funny how that mood will match something on that level as well. I always find that really interesting, So like, I'm going to get the carrot sticks out and the hummus and make a nice fresh salad. That's generally people that have a bad day want the fix, which is actually bad for you and actually makes you feel bad. After a really brief satisfaction, you feel bad. You can feel it. Yeah.
You can, but you see that very brief satisfaction is actually a release of opioids. And those opioids actually calm down the stress response and allow you to feel calm and relaxed and in control and that everything's okay before you have that blood glucose dip. And that's a learned behavior, Gabby. So that's where the neurology of behavior and food habits comes in, because you learn that bag of crisps is going to give you that instant lift. You don't exactly know the mechanism underpinning how it does that, but you know that it does it. And that's a learned behavior. So yeah, you need to find a replacement for that. And one of the things to do, because what actually happening is what we call decision fatigue, that the brain actually runs out of energy towards the end of the day. And then you easily do one of two things. You either do a knee-jerk reaction, which is a habitual response, or you do nothing. But in the case of the brain being hungry, it will always choose food. It won't ever choose nothing because it's a survival mechanism. So decision fatigue is something to avoid and make sure that you've got a check and balance when that's going to happen. So don't have those chocolate brownies in the pantry. Have something else that is also yummy, but doesn't have the same effect on you instantly.
And I think recognizing those initial thoughts, you can override them, or you can just ride the wave of them. So you don't have to give into them just because you have that thought and that sensation that you're going to be fulfilled briefly by the packet of lollies or whatever it is. You know that you just have to give a little bit of time and maybe give a bit of focus to why you're doing what you're doing and focusing on your goals, and you can just get past that little bit of chatter that tries to drag you into that underworld of wine and chocolate and cheese and eggs.
Absolutely. I think something that people can do, they can find an image of what their goal is. And they can take that image and they can put it on the fridge or put it inside their pantry door or put it somewhere that they know they can look at when they're having a bad moment, and they can just remind themselves of what the overall goal is. And then, they can check in with themselves. I say to people, sometimes people reach for food when they're actually thirsty, because thirst is something that people can often overlook. And they say, oh, well, I'm actually, I'm hungry, but they're actually thirsty. So that's something to do. Just have a glass of water, take a deep breath, go and look at your pet, go and give them a stroke, walk around on the grass, and then come back and see if you want to make the same decision. And hopefully you don't have that bad thing in the pantry. You have something else. But I think, and once again, you're starting to build a new neural pathway. It's not going to be overnight. People need to be patient with themselves. If they feel tempted and they feel guilty and they feel bad because they're wanting the food that they've been used to consuming for 2 decades, they're actually being too hard on themselves. It takes ages to build a new neural pathway. They just need to persevere with it. It's like anything. And once they realize that, they'll say, okay, this is actually a process. It's not an overnight instant click your fingers and it's done. It's a process that they just have to commit to.
I think also that what you're saying about even feeling hungry, one thing when I did the vegan diet, I realized how little I ever feel hungry. So when I felt actually like, oh, I could eat something. So that's interesting too, to think how many times we eat without even being hungry. Your body's not even craving anything. It's just a habitual. And just this idea of breakfast, lunch and dinner even, that's just someone's concept of eating, and we know that that's not what all cultures do. You know, in like Mediterranean region, they like to eat late at night, and then they have siestas in the afternoons, and they have a very different times of the day that they actually consume food. I also like Michael Morley, the 5-2 diet? Michael Morley, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
saw him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw him speak at a conference, and I I love that idea. I've tried it; it hasn't worked for me. I just so you know the 16-hour feeding window.
Yes.
Have you tried it?
It's the intermittent fasting.
Intermittent fasting, yeah.
Yeah. And look, it's an interesting concept, and people have asked me about that a lot. And I think it's very individual. I think when people, it depends on their metabolism. It also depends on their stress level. If people are really stressed and they're battling, with adrenal exhaustion, and they're trying to do intermittent fasting, they're just going to add insult to injury, because being really hungry and feeling that sense of hunger adds to the stress response, because the body and brain sees that as a huge stressor if you don't have food. Obviously, over time, if you practice it for long enough, you don't have that intense hunger. So you can get used to it. But I often suggest to people who want to do it to be able to manage weight because they're so stressed, or manage their life and they're using that as an excuse to do that, to first deal with the stress and then go into the intermittent fasting. There's a lot of science to support intermittent fasting for autophagy and all sorts of wonderful things that happen to your cell and cognitive benefit, but there's not a lot of research on that in humans long term. So most of that research is animal research. So we can't always extrapolate that to humans. Humans are a lot more complex than rats in a cage, with running around a maze and so on. So I would be hesitant to say that fits, the goal for everybody. Definitely some people can benefit from that, and many people have benefited from that. I say to people, if you can go from 6 o'clock dinner, when you have your dinner, to 7 or 8 o'clock the next morning, that's a good 13, 14 hours of not consuming anything. If that's as good as your intermittent fasting can go, that's excellent. And I think that's wonderful. It gives your digestive system a wonderful break. It allows for cell growth and development and all sorts of things that happen when you're not consuming food, and that's wonderful. But to push it more than that, if that becomes a stress for you to do, then don't do it. You don't have to. Just as long as you're doing it for that period of time, that's wonderful. And then don't eat between meals, break your fast in the morning at whatever time you decide to do that, and then eat when you're hungry, as you've just pointed out. As you say, people look at the clock and go, oh, it's 1 o'clock, I have to eat. It's not the case. That feeling of hunger is a wonderful feeling. It's actually a feeling of liberation. And a lot of people don't realize that, because it's a direct message from your brain and your body that now is the right time to consume food. And it's really a wonderful sign. And if people took that to heed more often, we'd have a lot less weight problems. But as you said, people eat because they think they need to. So you may find that you break your fast at, let's say, 8:30 and 9, and then you're only hungry at like 2, 2:30, and then you have a larger meal. And then maybe for dinner, you have a much smaller meal. And then the next morning you wake up and you do the same thing. And you do that over a period of time, it becomes a habit. And then you're actually doing intermittent fasting, but not as strictly as, some of the zealots online will tell you that you need to do it to get the benefit. I think everybody needs to look at themselves individually before they, follow that path.
Delia, I love talking to you, and I love hearing the psychology along with the nutrition, because it's so important that they're two things. You don't usually hear them together. It's always just nutrition this and then psychology that, and they're so separate, but they are actually one and the other. And I think what we've discussed today has really proven that as well. Thank you so much for your time. If someone wants to find more information out about you, where would they go?
They can go to my blog, which is www.lby.life, which stands for Lighter Brighter You.life, and they can go and read my articles there. They can also purchase my books. I'm busy working on an online course at the moment, which is taking my in-person course and turning it into an online course so that I can still help people and support them to make change. And that's what I'm going to be doing, taking the psychology, the neurology, and the nutrition and putting it together. So I'm looking forward to doing that. And people can always email me and ask me a question. I can do private coaching for people if they're interested in that. So they can just reach out if that's what they're interested in doing, and we can work out a 3 or 6 month program. And I'm on Facebook and I'm on Instagram, And I'm on LinkedIn, so people can find me wherever they want to.
Oh, great. You're tuned in. You're in all these places. Delia, so great to talk to you. Thanks so much.
An absolute pleasure, Gabby. Have a wonderful afternoon.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.